welcome everybody. I'm Sarah Coleman. I'm a fellow of the APM. I'm also a former non-exec director to the APM. I'm going to spend the next minutes talking about diversity, what it is, why it's important for us and our organisations, and particularly what it means for the project, programme, portfolio and change community. And after that I will hand over to Elizabeth Goodman and to Kent Thompson. So I've worked in the project, programme and change arena for over 30 years, starting out in IT and then migrating into telecoms and across the public and private sectors in both the UK and internationally. But in all that time, I've always kept in mind some of the learning that I took from my first degree in anthropology. And for those who are not familiar with it, it's the study of the origins, physical and cultural development, biological characteristics, social customs and beliefs of mankind, and womankind too. And it looks at population migrations, the adaptation of human populations to geography, human genetics, and how societies we construct work to prescribe the way we act and we think. And in short, it helps to explain the diversity of the human race. And my first degree helped me to develop my systems perspective and give me a particular way of looking at organisations, at organisational culture and the ways in which groups of people behave in organisations. It looks at how and why groups come together, what makes them stay together, what makes them move apart. And we as humans are a very social species. We're tribal by nature and we benefit from belonging to a group. And we understand from our long history that our survival can depend on being accepted. And so we're taught from a very early age to conform to the norm. And through the society we create, we construct our version of normal. So what is diversity? Well, diversity is how we see things differently. It's nature as well as nurture. So although it has a basis in genes, genetics, DNA, it's actually also about life experiences and what we find from them too. And I'm a great fan of Malouf when he said that diversity is actually against everything that makes for a monotonous and puerile world. Why are we so concerned about diversity when we see all of these things with different perspectives, traditional or trendy, order and chaos, work and play? Well, a sanity check on diversity. And perhaps the most obvious one is around gender diversity, and it's certainly something that continues to hit the headlines, from the number of women on boards to parity in pay. But in its broadest sense, it's about bringing together the right mix of backgrounds, thinking styles, abilities, cultures, ethnicities, and ensuring that these different perspectives all have a seat at the table. So I've personally experienced diverse teams and the difference that they can make, and I'm sure you have too, in terms of better reflecting customer base, challenging groupthink, making more robust decisions. It became clear to me early in my career that we all see the world through a different lens. Not better or worse necessarily, just different. But some people still seem to think that conversations should be limited to people who agree with them. But I think that learning and developing typically comes from differences of opinions. So research tells us time and again that different styles and experience makes for better outcomes. And during your own career, you've probably completed one-on-one psychometric profiling tools. And from the Belbin team types, I can tell that I'm a strong shaper with a secondary preference for a completer finisher. And for me, this has meant that I've had to spend a lot of time and effort understanding and coming to love the monitor evaluators in the team. Some of these dimensions of diversity are visible and obvious, and some of them are a lot less visible and a lot less obvious, but they're all there and they all help to shape who we are and how we consider and how we view the world. So why does diversity make sense in a rapidly changing, volatile, uncertain and ambiguous world? Well, there are a number of areas here. Number one is it helps to reflect the client and customer base for organisations. We've heard a lot on the research around how diverse boards and teams make better decisions. and also the war for talent. We're hearing now a lot about trying to bring on new generations of project managers, project leaders, project practitioners, rather than going back to the same pool of these people, especially for major complex projects that are coming along as well. And the benefits of group problem solving, variety of perspectives, more information, so more choices, hopefully leading to better decision reliability, and actually helping to counteract unconscious bias. So what's the particular value of diversity to our own community? Moving from tolerance to embracing differences, and this is really aiming at focusing and developing high-performing teams, understanding the strengths perhaps through psychometric profiling tools, but on other areas as well. But everybody comes with a different set of perspectives and different set of experiences, as well as skills and behaviours. And again, better decision making and better working behaviours too, especially at a time when we work typically in matrix teams, using matrix management and virtual working right across geographies and across countries as well. It also helps in the understanding of key stakeholders, so clients, sponsors especially, also key suppliers too. So a number of these actually trying to understand their own views and possibly own views of success of what you're trying to achieve. So a question for you as well, and this is one that you might just want to put into your message box on the bottom right hand of your screen, is what other value do you see in diversity for our community, for projects, programs, portfolios and change? Lucy Marcus likes to challenge our thinking. She's very influential, a lady in the area that she works in, and she says we tend to be intuitive and instinctive when making our judgments on who to trust and who we respect, and that these judgments are grounded in what we consider to be familiar and safe. And I think it's those areas about familiar and safe that actually we tend to go back to a lot. So I'm going to finish up now just talking about a little bit about the new neuroscience and what it teaches us about diversity and also about bias. So past experience, current context, personality, expectations, biases, these all have an impact on how we perceive the world and what we take in. So two authors in particular have helped to inform my thinking about project leadership, about decision making in projects, and in the way that in which we make judgments about stakeholders and team members. And the first of these authors is actually Daniel Kahneman, and he published a little while back Thinking Fast and Slow, and he looks at two systems, Systems 1 and Systems 2 thinking, and about how we make choices. So System 1 thinking is fast, it's intuitive, it's automatic, it's often subconscious and very emotional. System 2 is a little bit more slow, it's a rational thinking, more calculated, more conscious. And the example he often gives is about asking somebody to do mental arithmetic. That's when System 2 actually kicks in. And reading his book, it's easy to understand how our minds are tripped up by error and prejudice, even when we think we're being logical. Why is there more chance we'll believe something we're reading if it's in bold typeface? And why do we assume a good-looking person will be more competent? And he also describes what he calls the effect heuristic, and it's where people let their likes and dislikes determine their beliefs about the world. So this can be anything from recruiting your project team to agreeing which projects are allocated budget and resources. If you like the project, you might think that the costs are going to be low and the benefits are high. So it's basically blinding yourself to the reality. The other author is actually Steve Peters, who is a lot more popular, and he talks about the chimp paradox. Especially in this area, it's the central area of the limbic system, which is linked to emotions and survival thinking, which is often on a par, looked on and linked with on a par with system 1 thinking. So the limbic system, it works with feelings and impressions, very, very automatic, very instinctive. It's the flight, fight or freeze reaction. It's very right here, right now, very immediate. And it often jumps to an opinion. It thinks in black and white, it's binary, it's on or off. And it's been described as a little bit being paranoid, catastrophic, irrational, and very emotional. But these all act to help to keep you safe. They're the very fundamental parts of the subconscious. And one of the things talked a lot about at the moment is unconscious bias and how it impacts our behavior and our view of diversity because of the associations we develop. And once we establish biases, they become to function unconsciously and quite rapidly. And this unconscious bias acts whether or not we have any regard for truth or validity or the association or stereotype driving the bias. And our unconscious biological reactions take place well below the level of consciousness. We're talking about 100 milliseconds, we're talking about 250 milliseconds before our conscious actually processes engage. So unconsciously, we process around 200,000 times more information each second than we do consciously. So this gives our unconscious a really powerful edge over our conscious minds. So how does this manifest itself in behavior? Well, unconscious bias produces more spontaneous behavioral effects. It can be cold shouldering somebody, it can be less friendly non-verbal reactions. But this type of bias is triggered at great speeds and it often escapes our conscious monitoring. So certainly both Daniel Kahneman and Steve Peters' works both have helped me to understand this better.
So my name is Elizabeth Goodman and I am on the Enabling Change SIG committee, and our vision is to improve the change capability of organisations, teams and individuals. And on our next slide we can give you a bit of an indication of how we're doing that. So we have a dedicated page on the APM website. We have, I think we're the second newest SIG, so our membership is still growing and we're quite proud to have, as of today, 360 members. But obviously even non-members are very welcome to attend our events and to access our information on the APM website. We have the second item that's shown on this slide, on the picture of our website, is all the material that we've already been collecting that can act as reference material for anyone who wants to develop their change capability. And we're also in the process of developing a guide, and coincidentally we'll also be having a whole day event on the 29th of September, co-organised with the Southwest West of England branch. We have a regular newsletter, and we also use something called Spark Collaboration, which is like an online dating system. It gives you the opportunity to arrange to meet other people who are interested in enabling change, and to do so either face-to-face or by Skype or by phone. So if you're interested in finding out more about our SIG, do please get in touch.
Hi, my name's Kent Thompson. I work for a consultancy, project management and change and Lean Six Sigma consultancy called PQ'd. I'm quite new, and I've spent the last 7 odd years running around the world for GlaxoSmithKline implementing change. And what I would like to give you a feel for today is some of the things that you need to think about when you're working across cultures. And as my patch for the past 5 years has been bits of Europe and bits of Asia, I've got a few interesting reflections on that. So there's a seminal moment for me which really helped me to understand that people think differently in different places, and that my rude awakening was when I was giving a seminar, a session where we were looking at making decisions about change. We were considering something called emergent change, which is where change bubbles up. So there might be some direction set from the top, some direction around a few big rules, which is the way that it goes. But otherwise, it's all about people making connections on their own, getting enthusiastic, doing stuff, and it bubbles up from the bottom. Now, I was talking to this Chinese group about this, and they were very interested, and I said at the end, well, if you were the subject of change, wouldn't that be much more comfortable for you and a much nicer way to be treated? And there was dead silence. So I stood for a moment, and the organizer, recognizing that this is one of those moments where the facilitator needs rescuing, stood up and said, oh yes, I think we'd agree it would be. Now, someone else stood up and said, no, actually, Chinese people don't like chaos. So what she had heard described was not a happy-go-lucky situation where a lot of people were finding common interest and working out the change for themselves, but she had heard something that was unplanned and therefore potentially chaotic. So there are a number of models of what dimensions you need to look at when you're communicating in different cultures and therefore trying to execute change in different cultures. There's a particularly good one, an 8.1 in the Erin Meyer's book, The Culture Map. I'm not going to go into them all in theory now, but just pick up on a couple of points which are in simple terms and practical. But if you'd like to get more into the theory, then you're very welcome to read that book. So reading between the lines is where we're going to start. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a dialogue, which was not unlike one I've heard in China, although I did take it from the book, from a blog. So Mr. Smith says, it looks like we're going to have to keep the office open on Saturday. Mr. Liu says, I see. So Mr. Smith then says, can you come in on Saturday? Mr. Liu said, yes, I think so. That'll be a big help. Yes, Saturday's a special day, did you know? Is it? It's my daughter's birthday. Oh, that's great. I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you. I appreciate your understanding. So, that is an interesting conversation. Here's another one that's quite fun. And I found this one in the taped on the wall of the European headquarters of a former company I worked for. Interesting because it was a number of nationalities that were located in that headquarters, but it was in England. And I think if you read it, you might have a bit of a laugh, which is probably what we need at this point in our session. But I think you might agree that you've actually recognized some of those things. So when somebody says, that's very interesting, what they mean is it's clearly nonsense. But what somebody who wasn't in a high context culture, not just England, might understand is they're impressed. When someone says, I only have a few minor comments, actually what that means is, please do rewrite it completely. But what somebody, a European, might understand is, well, he's found a few typos. I won't read through them all. It's actually quite easy to find this, and it will be included in the slides that we put forward. So they is us, and part of the point about communicating and reading between the lines is that you need to understand your own biases. And indeed, Sarah was talking about that earlier. So that was reading between the lines. Let's go on to understanding someone else's rules, because the rules can be different in different societies. There's not much, the theory behind this actually relates to a number of different dimensions, but I'm going to talk about it in a practical way. So this is the Japanese character for harmony. And getting to yes in Japan isn't something that's done the same way as you might do it in, say, America. And my task in Tokyo a few years back was to persuade some Japanese people, procurement people and buyers in our headquarters, that they actually wanted to change the terms of invoicing and so on. And in Japan, there's some very strict social rules about how companies deal with each other. The wind is changing in Japan, as you know. It changes a lot all the time. But that was something that they were not comfortable with when I spoke to them. Now, a colleague of mine, a West Coast Scot, had attempted to do something different, but is a very direct kind of person who actually hadn't managed to make a lot of headway. And so what I did was I spent a lot of time to start with establishing rapport and actually reading the body language. So when were the Japanese people likely to move, and when were they really not going to move at all? And I went out with them and talked about the good points about Japan, and I think it's fair to say it was a harmonious relationship, or you could say that I gave them a reputation to live up to, which everybody likes to be thought well of, and that's particularly true in Asian countries. So getting to yes, basically we had a conversation, and I thought it was going nowhere. But then the next day they came and said, well, we thought about the 3 days and here's what we want to do. And that was actually a result. But the point that I want to make is influencing and persuading and getting change to happen in an Asian culture is very different from in another culture, which is today's statement of the blindingly obvious, I guess, but thinking about concepts which are familiar to them, rules which are familiar to them, like the need to preserve harmony, are important. So, referring to our poll, I'm going to talk about what I like to call the feedback sandwich, and some people have a less polite name for that, but it's dealing specifically with a French colleague who was having difficulty understanding the feedback she was given. So what she was a French person working in England. She was getting the usual English feedback sandwich, which consists of 2 parts: positive praise, to 1 part make direct feedback, perhaps about something that's a little bit a development need. And actually most of this research shows that French people are much more direct than English people. So our poll was interesting from that point of view. And what she was hearing was the positive feedback, and she was hearing the bit in the middle and thinking, yes, that's all right, I can do something about that, but it's not a big thing. Of course, the person that was giving that feedback was trying to couch it in a positive way, and also was trying to, at the same time, give a serious message. And I think, for me, the way of understanding the rules of the way that you talk and communicate are as much about saying, yes, I need to frame up what I'm saying so that the other person will understand it. Maybe you use ground rules. Maybe you would preface your way of communicating important change messages with things like, well, I like to give feedback. I like to be focused on the positive as well as the negative, but the negative, the developmental, it is important too. So, but how do you do it? I think possibly the stories I've told you, we can draw a few threads together. And some of these are rooted in neuroscience. So creating rapport and gaining trust, just spending more time doing that, understanding different concepts, understanding what the rules are for that society, and demonstrating to the people you're with you understand what those rules are. Excuse me, as well as all the usual trust and credibility things like delivering and being true to your word and so on. The use of the senses to see what's actually between the lines is a major thing, and all that means is that you need to look more closely at what's going on: breathing, skin color, skin tone. Actually, whether the person, in one case, I worked out something wasn't right with somebody because of the way they were perspiring, despite the fact they were keeping a poker face. And then focusing on common outcomes, particularly I have a lot of experience in Asia, so I think a lot about needing to create harmony, but it works in the US as well. Being flexible in behavior and language. So if you're normally a fairly direct, no-nonsense kind of person, then thinking about, perhaps in this situation, I need to be slightly less direct and gentler works. So what might you do in practice? One thing is to have a sit down, if you have a multinational team, before you do anything, and that hopefully that will include some social element, and think about what the ground rules you have for thinking together. And some of these might be Pausing before speaking to allow others to speak. It's important in Asia. And when I say pause, I mean pause, 2, 3, 4 kind of pause, to give a clear signal that you're inviting others to speak. And in our culture, particularly in headquarters and with senior leaders, that's not always happens. You might want to hold your important meetings from Monday to Thursday. For example, in Indonesia, the religious commitments on a Friday are quite strong, and so you may choose to respect that day. Other countries, of course, as you know, would work Sunday instead of Friday. Be relatively gentle in giving feedback, but be clear. And again, it's understanding what are the rules for feedback in that country. And you can do a lot of research beforehand, because quite a lot of this is written about quite widely. And give time to reflect before making important decisions, or take time to comment explicitly on manners. And there's one country where you might decide titles and position, either they do matter or they don't matter. So there might be some people there for whom it's very important to be able to communicate well with their boss, and other people where it's a more informal relationship.
As a man, I'm interested to understand why women need more help than men.
I'm very intrigued to hear that that's the interpretation, actually. I'm not entirely sure that they do. Perhaps the conversation is more around which areas, why do you think they need more help, and in which areas do you think they need help? That would be a very interesting conversation. It's a very general question, and I would like to explore a little bit more about what prompted that and where it actually comes from.
Okay, do you think it's more important to focus on the facts and not make up your own interpretations?
I thought that's quite a generic question.
This came up right at the start when you were first giving examples of some of the interpretations of things that people might be saying. With your example about coming in, yes.
The short answer is everyone makes interpretations of what they hear. If it's a fact like a number, then fine. Obviously, a number is a number. But a lot of what we do involves, particularly with change, is about people's perceptions. And I think understanding what the perceptions are is important, because a person's perception is their reality, that is their fact, unless it's presented in a different way, or they can be Philip was looking for, but yeah.
Now we're going to go back to Terry for another question for Sarah.
Yes, Sarah, this was when you asked people to give a comment on what they thought diversity was about, and she said she thought diversity equals more engagement in a more inclusive organization. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that one.
I'm delighted to hear that, because that's very much my interpretation as well. I think for me diversity is about acknowledging the differences, but actually saying they can be positive and beneficial. So for me diversity does go hand in hand with inclusivity, and I know the two are talked about a lot. At the moment, it's very much a key thing in organisations to do this and talk about it, but for good reasons. I mean, for a lot of organisations, it does actually hit the bottom line. That's what a lot of the research is telling us at the moment. But for us as a community, for project, programme, portfolio change practitioners and communities, it's really about being able to understand different perspectives and actually bring that strength in and that robustness. So yes, Maria, I'd very much underline that and support that. Thank you.
Okay, so back to Kent, and Philip, thank you for responding back again, where you say that you think Kent partly answered your question when he explained that reading between the lines was more of a UK thing, and the managed by fact approach was one that you, Philip, picked up whilst working in the US. So thank you for that. Kent, we've got another question from Eileen, which is, are there any fundamental behaviours that are acceptable across all cultures?
Oh, that's a good question. Consideration for the other person is accepted yes, I think consideration for the other person, showing that consideration is part of building rapport wherever you are. And that's the kind of the only universal that I would say. It's probably something worth thinking about. Clarity of communication, well, no, not necessarily. Yeah, that would be what I would say, is consideration for the other person. Even if so for example, if you're trying to speak the language, almost anywhere, even if you speak it badly, people will appreciate that you've tried and that you're trying to get alongside them. And just things like noticing if your group is tired or they're needing a change, those kinds of things. That would be the one universal I could think of. It's possible there's others, of course.
Some of the images in the slides indicated women get less pay than men, and the question was, how do we overcome this to apply for promotions in certain male-dominated industries, and how do we even find the average base salaries? Sarah, do you want to say something about this?
Thank you. That's a very large question. There are lots of different components to that, so let me try and unpick it a little bit. Yes, one of the slides did imply that women, I think it was from The Guardian in February, they had a headline that it was in dollars, so this is the US-based research, was that women who were potentially overweight actually earned less. And at the same time, on top of that photo was another photo of height disparity between men that actually implied also that taller men get chosen and promoted quicker and therefore have higher earning rates than shorter men. Now, whichever way you see it, and there are a lot of research and a lot of papers written about this at the moment, the big issue for a lot of people is around gender pay gaps. You asked how to understand. Well, there are a lot of research being done, and I think hopefully you will have seen the invitation from the APM recently to actually take part in their annual salary survey. So there's the APM survey through Wellington. There's also ARIS People that bring out their benchmark report on an annual basis too. And those are two good areas to start looking at and to try and benchmark what your own salary is against your peers. You also asked about promotion and how you actually break into that arena. Some of this is around the organizations themselves. Some organizations are a lot better at being very transparent about what you need to do and what capabilities and skill sets you need in order to get promotion. And many organizations now do it on the basis of merit rather than any kind of networks. And I know somebody who would be great for that. So there is a lot more transparency now than there has been. Not quite sure what kind of an organization you work in and whether you have that transparency, but it's always a great idea to inform your own line manager that actually you are actively looking for promotion, that you are ambitious, that you want to continue to build your skill set, and they can well help you within the organization. You could also consider finding yourself a career sponsor or career coach that would help you within the organization, or a mentor within the organization who could also open up some opportunities to you. So I hope from that you can see there are a range of information sources, but also a range of options open to you.
Why in the UK do we have to read between the lines? Is it because UK people are not able to be as direct as other cultures?
To cut a long story short, cultures have different levels of reading between the lines, and I think it's to do with the history and the way they've developed, and actually the age of the culture seems to matter as well. So if you think about Chinese culture, it's very old and very developed, whereas US culture, meaning in the best possible way, is a younger culture and it seems to be more direct. So it seems to be to do with age, but also it's just the way that the culture has developed. That's the short answer. There's probably a longer one.